interview this morning, or talk, really, it's not an interview. We're going to talk with a guy that came up, and I got to talk with him last year. Stephen Ananian is here with us. I practiced that last name several times, Stephen, because I know you've had it butchered over the years.
No, you did very well.
Well, thank you again for being with us again this year. You were here last year, and I got to tell you, most people, if you tell them to name an airplane from World War II, most people, I think, bomber, fighter, cargo, transport, whatever, are going to say the P-51 Mustang most of the time.
That's for sure.
It's the iconic aircraft of World War II, and you flew it, right?
That's true.
Tell me a little bit about, first of all, before we get into some of the stories, we want to thank you for your service and thank you for being here. And I want to thank you because of you and all the men and women who are of your era and who fought and served in World War II. I'm speaking English instead of German or Japanese, and I have the freedoms I have. Thank you for that.
Well, don't thank me. I loved it.
Well,
I love moments of, you give a 20-year-old kid a P-51 Mustang, and you're really playing with danger.
I was going to say, you give a young man that kind of power, grace, and beauty, and man. Well, the P-51, let's talk about that for just a second, since that's kind of a common ground young and old alike would know about. We all know what it looks like. We've seen it and heard it flying. Beautiful sounding aircraft with that Rolls-Royce Merlin engine in it. Tell me what it was like to fly the P-51, because I'm sure you trained in other aircraft. You flew many other aircraft. Tell me what made the P-51 an outstanding aircraft.
Well, first of all, it was a very fast aircraft. It had, the design was, it had a laminar flow wing, which is aerodynamically perfect. And it's the only aircraft at that time that had laminar flow. And this meant that the resistance, if it was like dragging a 2.5 square foot plywood through the air, that was the resistance, because of it, it was very fast aircraft. We flew straight and level, top speed was 475 miles an hour.
Wow, that was a fast for that time, wasn't it?
But the plane was redlined at 575 miles an hour. And the speed of sound is 600 miles an hour. So, I should say that again. It depends on the altitude.
Right, at sea level. I have heard that they think several people actually probably broke the sound barrier in a P-51 in a dive a few times because they would actually exceed that speed.
You're talking about me.
I am talking about you. I remember from last year.
Yeah, that's true. I was in a dogfight. I was defending my wingman, and there was there were 2 other P-51s that I was on their tail protecting them. And in order to get into position, I hit compressibility, which means that you are at the speed of sound. And the airplane, when you look out of the wings, the aluminum foil ripples like this, just like you can't believe that that's the effect. And you go so fast. When I did this, we knew nothing about compressibility. We had never heard about it. And so, but I realized what was happening, and there was no training what to do in that case. But, you know, you use your common sense, and I said, well, I better slow down. I'm going too damn fast. So I just took my throttle back a little bit and slowed down, and I recovered enough to defend the other 2 P-51s, and they destroyed the ME-109.
Wow.
When I got back, I realized that I had subjected the aircraft to some sort of strain. So I made a very soft landing and came in. And when I landed, you have a Form 1A log. And I wrote on it, hit compressibility, check aircraft thoroughly. And that was it. My crew chief saw that. He said, what's compressibility?
He didn't even know.
No. And so anyway, I explained to him what it was. And that evening, I was at chow at the mess hall, and the captain in charge of maintenance came over to me. He said, hey, Ananian, what the hell did you do? I said, what do you mean? He said, what kind of landing did you make? He says, I said, I made a very soft landing. Why? He says, well, he says, every rivet in that aircraft is stretched a half an inch long, the rivet holes. from nose to tail. I said, well, that wasn't a landing. He says, the hell it wasn't. He says, come and I'll show you your airplane. And we went out with the Jeep to the hangar, and there was the airplane sitting there. And I looked at it, and I said, was the landing craft bent, the landing gear bent? And he said, no. I said, well, if I made a rough landing, I would have bent the landing gear. I said, and I said, I have another question for you. He said, what's that? I said, what happened to the paint on the airplane? It had burnt it all completely off.
Really? The air friction had actually burnt the paint off?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Wow.
And I said, I marked on the Form 1A that I hit compressibility. And he said to me, what's that?
He didn't even know.
So,
I love it.
Yeah,
and for those who don't know, compressibility, when you go near the speed of sound, the air is compressed, pushed by the speed of the aircraft and the sound waves. Literally, you can get into an area where none of your control surfaces actually will work. It's as if the plane is locked up, and of course, it's putting tremendous strain on the fabric of the aircraft, or the outside of the aircraft. That's amazing. Yeah. Your wings didn't come unlaminated and just come apart.
Well, no, now you know why it was red line. You couldn't fire the guns at 575 miles an hour.
I got you. Man, that's amazing. So did you love, I know this is a redundant question, did you love flying the P-51?
Oh, yes. It was, I flew it yesterday, right here.
That was my next question. Now, all right, we're going to ask in a minute about your last flight in Paris, the last time you flew before you were out of service. But yesterday, you got back in a P-51 and flew it.
Yes, yes, yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, that was a thrill. I climbed it. I flew in gunfighter. They invited me to fly, and it was living like it was before. The only trouble is I wanted to sit in the front seat, not in the back. But, of course, I couldn't. I'm too old. My hearing isn't that good. I can't hear the control tower, so I couldn't do that. But I could fly the plane, I think.
Let me ask you about that. So let me see. I'm not very good at math. So how many years had it been since 1945 is the last time you flew?
Yeah, it's 71 years.
71 years you had not been back in the cockpit of a P-51.
Yeah.
All right. How did it fly? Did it come back to you? Did it feel like bicycle?
Well, we took off, and the pilots got on the radio and talked to me and said, what would you like to do? I said, roll. He made one roll. And I haven't flown upside down since 1971, and it was lovely just hanging upside down by a seatbelt. And so, to make a long story short, he asked me, how about, are you okay? He was afraid I was going to get airsick, you know. And so I said, no, I'm all right. How about doing another one to the left? And he did another roll. We did 4 rolls before we came back. And then we flew over the field. And the whole thing brought about memories, but and I was pleased to, to be there. So
I was going to ask you, for someone that had the experiences you have, we're going to talk about a little bit, actual combat missions. You're a young man in what was then a cutting edge, amazing aircraft, fighting in this incredible war that was so important. I mean, that puts some pretty serious memories in your head, I'm sure. But then to go back into the cockpit and be flying and smelling, seeing, and feeling the exact same experiences that you had 71 years ago, did it bring back a lot of powerful feelings?
Absolutely. I didn't want to get out of the airplane.
Really?
No, I said. They said, "We'll help you out." I said, "No, I'm not going to
sit there a while.
I want to sit there." But what they did is they let me get out and then climb in and sit in the front seat again. And I was in, on cloud 9. I was in pilot's heaven.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go back, and I know everybody wants to hear the story, so this is amazing. Your experiences are the kind that we'll never see again. You're flying in Europe in World War II. Tell me about a couple of your combat missions, because most of us can't imagine, first of all, even flying these incredible aircraft just for that moment, but to actually do it and have to fly, like you were saying, to protect your buddies, to protect yourself, to complete the mission. You ended up having to be in combat. What was that like? Tell me some memories you have of those.
Well, for one thing, being a fighter pilot is like being on a football team. everybody has a job what to do. There's 16 aircraft flying in formation, and in combat you're in battle formation, which means that you're flying line abreast with about 100 feet between each aircraft. And the reason for that is it allows every pilot to look around and make sure without flying close to another plane. So this is the combat battle formation that you flew in. But when an enemy aircraft attacked you, everybody had a job to do automatically. And it was like, as I said, playing football, everybody knew what to do. And of course, the first thing we did, if an enemy aircraft came at you, you turn into the enemy aircraft. It was nothing to be in a dogfight, 15-1 odds. And I'm looking at the 15 planes and my wingman's with me, and I'm saying, geez, that's 7.5 for me and 7.5 for him. We're going to get double aces in one mission. But that's the attitude
it was a confident, let's get these guys down kind of thing, right? You wouldn't want to go into it fearful, because then you'd be on the defense rather than on the offense, right?
Yeah. And then not only that, the Germans had jet-propelled aircraft.
They did. The Me-262 was our first jet-powered fighter, wasn't it?
Yes, and they also had the Me-63 rocket.
Rocket, the one
yeah. And you have time for a funny story?
Sure we do.
Well, here I am, a young kid from New York. The only time I've been out of New York was I went to Jersey a couple times on the Hudson Tubes. And so when we got to England, it's a strange country. I mean, this is not only for me, it's everybody else. You know, most of the boys are Southerners. They get, when they're 5 years old, they go out with their father and shoot turkeys and stuff like that. But the only gun I ever saw was on the holster of the mountain policeman at a parade or something like that. So this was quite a unique experience for us. We're in England, a strange country. They spoke English, but words had different meanings.
Yeah, they spoke in English I can't hardly understand, to be honest with you.
Well, for instance, you don't call an elevator it's a lift. And you don't, the subway isn't a subway, it's an underground. A subway is an underpass on the highway. So that's, yeah, well, and so one day I was at the Tower of London with my wife, and I see a sign that says subway, and I'm looking for the subway system, and I go under, and I get on the other side, and the arrow's pointing the other way. We walk back and forth a couple of times, and then I turn to my wife and I said, I'm sorry, I apologize. She says, what? I said, the subway means underpass. That's not the underground. And so
I'd be looking for a sandwich shop.
Well, anyway, the story I wanted to tell you was part of your stay in England. Initially, you would get talks by the sergeant about England. They would teach you the language problems, the currency problems, and they always also had a joke. And they talked about this American soldier that was in England, and he wanted to be like the English. He wanted to be part of the environment, and so he had this English friend that was his buddy, and they talked to one another about the differences between the two countries. And the Brit turns around to the Yankee and says, hey Yankee, he says, how you making out? He says, well, not too good. He says, why? He says, well, you know, I went out on a fox hunt. I tried to be like the Brits, but they all laughed at me. So the Brit says, well, you know, Yank, when you go out and you see the fox, you say, tally ho the fox. Not there goes the son of a bitch. Well, you're laughing now. We were laughing all day long, all night long in the officers' club. And the next day we're flying over Holland, over the Zuiderzee, and all of a sudden this German Me-163 goes shooting through the formation, And this southern boy next to me says, "Towley goddamn ho, there goes a son of a..."
He put them together.
Yeah, we were, excuse the language.
That's funny though, man. Well, you know, the experience, we forget, I think, a lot of times that when you were over there, how old were you?
21 years old.
21, you were just a kid. And in this whole environment, flying these aircraft. Now, you mentioned that the Germans had a jet, an Me-262.
Right.
Tell me why that means something to you.
Well, I was the jet-propelled fighter had serious shortcomings. People always say, well, if Hitler had been smart and built more jets, they would have won the war. That's not true, because the jet aircraft has certain shortcomings then and still has now. And one of them is the fuel consumption. The Me-262 could carry enough fuel to fly for 40 minutes.
That's it.
Yeah, which meant that it couldn't go from Germany to England and do any damage. So they stayed over Germany defending the homeland. The other shortcoming of the Me-262 was they had to change the engine every 20 hours.
The whole engine had to be changed every 20 hours?
And the engines were made with pins, so they could very easily remove them and put another engine in. But there was two engines on an Me-262, and they had to be changed every 20 hours. So this was a shortcoming of the jet. Well, what the Germans would do, they would send the jets up early when the bombers just crossed in over Germany, and when they came with the jets to attack the bombers, the P-51s would drop their tanks and chase the jets. And the result was they lost all the gasoline in the tanks, and they didn't have enough fuel to escort the bombers all the way. And later on, the conventional fighters would come up and attack the bombers, and so that was the methodologies that the Germans used for the jets. Well, Hap Arnold was in charge of the 8th Air Force at the time, and he put out an order that you were not allowed to chase jets unless you were directly attacked. And this way, the fighters stayed with the bombers all the way, and the Germans lost the advantage they had, or were using the jets for. And the jets had one other problem. It wasn't the jet engine, but the pilots. The pilots were fighter pilots, and they were not experienced in flying on instruments. And so many times, if the weather was even a little overcast, they had 100-foot ceiling or something like that, they would crash, and they were losing a lot of jet planes to the weather. So the Germans decided, well, why don't we get bomber pilots to fly the jets, because the bomber pilots knew how to fly blind. And so they started one all-weather squadron, which were HE-111 bomber pilots. And the trouble with a bomber pilot is he doesn't know fighter maneuvers. Right. And on this particular day, when we were taking our mission, we came into briefing, I looked at the map, and the bombers were flying to Germany over Frankfurt. And just north of Frankfurt is a city called Fulda, and I had seen they have a jet airfield at Fulda, and I knew the weather was clear, that flying over Fulda meant that they would come up and the jet would come up. So I went to my squadron commander and I said, Lieutenant Colonel Thury, we used to call him Little Joe. I said, Little Joe, I said, I want permission to chase the jets. He said, why? And I explained to him, this is where we're flying, it's good weather, and I know the jets will come up. So I said, so what? You'll never hit them? I said, no, but I know where they're going to go back to land, and when they land, I'll be there waiting for them. He said, good idea, man. He said, you have permission. So I was the only one in in the whole group that had permission to chase the jets that day. And so we took off and we're escorting the bombers, and we get to Fulda area, and I look down, and there's the airfield. This is from 21,000 feet. I look down, I could see 10 Me-262 abreast take off, came up through the bombers, climbed through the bombers, turned around, dove down, shot down a couple of jets, and at that point, I turned to my flight leader and said, I'm leaving, and he said, good luck, Steve, and my wingman and I, we dropped our tanks and chased after. Well, we didn't chase after the jets because I knew I couldn't catch them, but when I headed for the spot where I thought they would dive to and then turn around, and I dove down, and at 15,000 feet, I engaged 3 of the jets in a dogfight. And I got a hold of the lead jet, and I pulled up through him. You know, we had a 100-mile-an-hour gun sight, and which meant if he's going 500 miles, you have to lead him by 5 radii, which meant that you couldn't see the plane when you were firing. So I'd go through the plane and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and start firing. And I couldn't see the strikes, but my wingman said, you got him, he's burning. And when I heard that, I flattened out to go to after the other 2 jets because I was afraid they'd come in on our tail and shoot us down. That's what I was worried about. And when I flattened out, I saw the jet with flames coming out of the engine and the pilot standing up to bail out. I fired a burst, killed the bastard, and then chased after the other 2 Me-262s, and the other 2 got away. Well, the story is a couple of years later, one of an American a jet historian, his name was Lorenz Rass, lived out in California, and he was constantly in touch with me. I had shot down jet. So he said, I'm going back to Germany to interview the squadron that you engaged that day. I said, oh, good. He says, I'll let you know what happens. So when he went there, he spoke to one of the pilots that got away that day. He says, yeah, I remember that plane. The name of my airplane was Baby Mine. He says, yeah, Baby Mac.
Baby Mac. He was close.
Yeah. So he says, I remember, he says, that plane, he was doing cartwheels, spins. I never saw an airplane move like that. Well, I was doing that to avoid being shot down. So he said, that man saved my life. He didn't kill me. And he took off his gold Me-262 pin, gave it to Lorenz. He said, I want you to give it to the pilot and thank him for me. And I have that pin.
You have the pin?
Yes.
Amazing,
yeah.
Amazing.
So,
well, we got to ask you too. You at the end of the war, there you found out that the E-Day, Victory in Europe Day, you were in Paris or near Paris. What was the story there? Your last flight?
Oh, well, during the war, Paris was declared an open city, which meant that the Germans wouldn't fly over Paris and we wouldn't. So we weren't allowed to fly over Paris. London had 5,000-foot high barrage balloons, so you couldn't fly over London. Besides, if you flew over them, they'd shoot you down. Because when you flew in England, they were very, very aware of the buzz bombs, and they fired at anything that moved. You had to be heading heading west or north to not be fired on, because anything flying, you had to fly east and north, and anything flying west and south could be a buzz bomb, and they shot at it. So this was the problems we had. And the last day of the war was VE Day, May 7th of 45, and that was the day I was coming home. I was booked to go to Scotland at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to go on board the Ile de France, which was a cruise ship, and it was a troop ship at the time. and they had booked passage for me to go home on that flight. And I felt a little bit of homesickness. Here I was, I'm going to leave the P-51. So about 6 o'clock in the morning, I got up. This is when we got up in England during the war. And I went over to my commanding officer's tent, and I said, "Sir," I said, "I'd like permission to fly a P-51 once again." He says, "Well, we're going to have a flyover later on in the afternoon, but you take one of the P-51s and yeah, you can fly it." And my wingman was with me. He says, "Can I go with him?" He says, "Okay." He says, "You keep Ananian out of trouble." So we took off, and now I decided I want to see Paris. So we were flying wingtip to wingtip, 50 feet off the ground, across the channel to France. We got to to Paris, and there was the beginning of the Champs-Élysées in Paris. I don't know if you know what it is, but it's a 5-lane roadway with horse trails and so forth. And so here we are. Yeah. Well, here we are. We're flying along the Champs-Élysées, the two of us, 50 feet off the ground, in formation. All the Frenchmen are waving at us as we go overhead. We get to the Arc de Triomphe, hop over it, keep going, and at the end is the Palais de Chaillot, and you make a left turn, and there's the Eiffel Tower and the Seine River. And so when we got to the Palais de Chaillot, I called on the radio and told my wingman, "Go up to 1,500 feet and cover me in case something happens." He said, "Why?" I said, "I'm going to fly under the Eiffel Tower." So I turned around and I headed for the Eiffel Tower, and just as I got there, the Germans had hung steel cables underneath with these orange balls on them, you know, to keep you from flying. So instead of going under the tower, I went alongside, but low, about 20 feet off the ground, and pulled up, and I said, "Dude, Tom Marvel, who's my wingman," he said, "You did it. You flew under." I said, "No, I didn't." He said, "Yes, you did. I saw you." I said, "No, I flew beside him." But to this day, he swears I flew under the Eiffel Tower. And the reason why I'm not saying anything is I didn't want anybody else to do it because it would start a trend.
And they might get them killed with those cables. Yeah, exactly. So, I want to remind everybody, you're going down the downtown Paris. How fast are you going? A couple hundred miles an hour, 150 miles?
No, about 250.
250 miles an hour, 50 feet. This hangar's, what is this hangar, 50 feet maybe high? 60 feet?
No.
So you were lower than the hangar door, right?
Yeah, okay.
And then when you were at the Eiffel Tower, you were like halfway down this hangar.
Oh,
You were on the deck.
I was on the deck. Before you get, I don't know if you know Paris, it's a beautiful city. And they have a park with fountains in front of the Eiffel Tower and a roadway leading to it. So
it's all flat out there.
Yeah. So it's low. I came in low, and as I get close, I see the damn cables. I pulled over to the side and pulled up. But
250 miles an hour, amazing. All right, well, Stephen, I got to ask you one more question before we let you go. And thank you again for sharing all your time and stories with us. It's just amazing. And again, we appreciate all that you have shared with us. I got to ask you, since you've had all this experience, tell me who, in your opinion, is the greatest fighter pilot of World War II?
You mean after me?
That's what I wanted to hear. I got to thinking, we talked about this last year, and it's a great joke, but the thing is, you really are a good fighter pilot. And the thing is, you actually beat Chuck Yeager, breaking the sound barrier probably, and survived it. And your experiences are something that many of us, all of us actually, but besides just a very few that are on this airfield today, can even imagine. And so you sharing it with us keeps alive the reality of what World War II meant. It's a time that'll never be again, and we appreciate you sharing that with us because it's living history, and thank you.
Well, thank you for having me and listening to my tales. My kids are tired of it. They don't listen anymore.
I would never grow tired of him. Stephen Ananian, everybody. Give him a round of applause. P-51 pilot, World War II, and a great guy. We thank you for your time. We thank you for sitting and being with us this morning. Don't forget what's happening here today. If you're not aware, there's two stages. There's the commemorative stage outside, and they do things out there, and then they let you come in here. We'll have the Victones. They'll be performing. The three guys that sing is the Victones. They'll be in here a little afternoon. We've got other veterans we're going to be talking to. We've got organizations we're going to be telling you about that are really amazing people doing great things you'll love and be fascinated by. It's a nice way to get out of the sun a little bit and a great time up here. So thank you for coming into the hangar. Go back out and enjoy it. Come back in just a little bit. We want you to feel free to have a great time with us here at Air Expo. I'm Dollar Bill. Thank you for being here. Victones are coming up here just a little after 12 noon.